Olympic Moscow still sparkled with bright shop windows. Import-ed champagne, sausage, and red caviar glistened on the shelves. For a brief moment, the city tasted abundance. But the celebration didn't last. When the Olympic bear flew into the sky, the goods vanished with it. Shortages returned, queues stretched longer, and the mood grew heavier. Meanwhile, the country's leaders fished, hunted, and attended parades, pretending nothing was wrong. The Soviet regime, convinced of its eternity, failed to see its foundations beginning to crumble. Just months after the Olympics, imported champagne and tropical fruits vanished from store shelves. Moscow woke up from its festive dream to find only empty jars and faded price tags. Shortages returned, and endless queues once again defined the city's rhythm. In those lines, people whispered, "The wages stayed the same, but everything else disappeared." Newspapers kept praising socialism's victories, yet in doorways, people murmured that the country was coming apart. Massive sums were spent on the Afghan war, on supporting foreign communist parties, on the arms race. Meanwhile, the aging leadership kept fishing, hunting, and hosting foreign guests, pretending nothing had changed. Behind the shining facade of power, decay was quietly setting in.
From the case materials, KGB reports noted rising social tension in Moscow and a growing shortage of food supplies. Complaints about trade came daily from workers, clerks, and soldiers alike.
At that time, Yuri Andropov resembled a chess master executing a long and careful strategy. He knew that to save the system, he had to control it from within. The Politburo was filled with aging men, ill, cautious, and afraid to lose power. Brezhnev barely governed anymore. He simply signed the papers placed before him. Around him stood Grishin, Kirilenko, Romanov, and Chernenko, each plotting to become the next general secretary. Andropov understood he couldn't win by open confrontation, so he played a subtler game. His weapons were discipline and information. Every act of corruption, every bribe, every indiscretion was quietly documented and stored in confidential folders. Those files would become the steps of his climb to the very top.
From the case materials, the KGB documented numerous cases of corruption among high-ranking party and trade officials. All reports were submitted directly to the chairman.
On Tverskaya Street, in the very heart of Moscow, stood grocery store number 1, the legendary Yeliseyevsky. For millions of Soviet citizens, it was a temple of abundance. Crystal chandeliers, marble columns, and endless displays. People came here to look, not to buy. Ordinary citizens had no place among the elite customers. Still, Yeliseyevsky was the symbol of Moscow's prestige, the glittering face of a city that hid its decay behind glass. Behind the polished counters ran a shadow economy built on favors, notes, and whispered deals. Sausage and coffee were exchanged not for rubles, but for signatures, connections, and obedience. Andropov already understood. If he pulled this thread, it would lead far beyond the grocery aisles, straight to the top of Soviet power.
From the case materials, operational surveillance confirmed that scarce goods in Yeliseyevsky were distributed through private lists. Among recipients were artists, party officials, and ministry employees.
Yuri Sokolov was born in Moscow in 1925. At 17, he went to the front, was wounded, and decorated for bravery. After the war, he drove a taxi, an ordinary Soviet man. In 1959, he was convicted of overcharging a passenger and sentenced to a year of correctional labor. It did not break him, it made him cautious. Later, he graduated from the Plekhanov Institute of Economics, became a trade manager, and slowly climbed into the upper circle of Moscow commerce. In 1972, he became the director of grocery store number 1, the Yeliseyevsky. Colleagues described him as strict but fair, a true master of his domain. He knew every supplier, every official, every loophole, and used them well. But by the early 1980s, the era of untouchable traders was over. Andropov needed a symbolic case, and Sokolov was the perfect target.
From the case materials, investigation established that director Yuri Sokolov accepted cash payments from subordinates as rewards for protection. Part of the funds was passed up to the Moscow trade leadership.
October 30th, 1982. Moscow had no idea that Brezhnev would be dead in 2 weeks. The morning at Yeliseyevsky began as usual: briefings, deliveries, paperwork. Around 10 o'clock, 4 men in gray coats entered the director's office. They presented KGB identification and an arrest warrant. Yuri Sokolov, still seated behind his desk, tried to smile. Moments later, agents pulled 150 rubles from his drawer, a debt repaid by a colleague, he said. That small sum became the first piece of evidence in one of the loudest corruption cases of the decade. The KGB could have escorted him out through the back door, but instead led him through the sales floor, in front of employees and customers. By evening, Sokolov was in the Lubyanka detention center.
From the case materials, during the search, 150 rubles were seized, allegedly a bribe. The detainee denied guilt and refused to testify.
After Sokolov's arrest, the case expanded rapidly. Investigators questioned his deputies, accountants, and store managers. Some kept silent, others signed confessions. Each new name pulled another into the chain. The KGB understood that to shake the system, they had to reach its top, the Moscow Trade Directorate, Glavtorg. Its chief, Nikolai Tregubov, was untouchable. He had direct access to the Kremlin and was celebrated as the man who fed the capital. But now, he was the next target. In early 1983, searches swept through apartments and dachas. Cash, jewelry, and foreign luxuries were seized. At one villa, investigators found gifts from store directors, from television sets to diamond rings.
From the case materials, investigation established that the head of Moscow Glavtorg NT accepted valuables as bribes for appointments and protection. Total sum exceeded 200,000 rubles.
The arrest of Tregubov was a show of power. As he was led down the corridor of the prosecutor's office, everyone understood that this operation had a goal beyond corruption. The Kremlin and party headquarters followed every step. Rumors of the Moscow Purge spread across the USSR. Andropov had achieved his purpose. Moscow was afraid. By spring 1983, the investigation of Sokolov was complete. Over 100 interrogations had been conducted, tens of thousands of rubles and hundreds of luxury items were confiscated. Sokolov admitted taking money, but denied high-level bribery, claiming he only followed orders. But Andropov needed an example, a public message. The trial was held behind closed doors, without journalists or the public. In the courtroom sat only prosecutors, KGB officers, and a few trade officials. The indictment was long, listing every payment and every signature. Sokolov listened calmly, as if it were someone else's story.
From the case materials, the accused Sokolov was found guilty of bribery and abuse of office, sentenced to the supreme measure execution by shooting. The court ordered confiscation of property.
News of the verdict spread instantly. To many, it signaled that there were no untouchables left. Within days, the sentence was carried out. The burial site was never disclosed to the family. Employees of the Yeliseyevsky learned of their director's death from the evening broadcast. The next morning, the store opened as usual. February 1984. Yuri Andropov died at the age of 69. The illness he had fought for years left his campaign unfinished. He departed, leaving behind dozens of classified folders, hundreds of reports, and thousands of lives broken by his own system. The party remained silent. On the funeral tribune stood the same faces that had smiled beside Brezhnev. Within weeks, Konstantin Chernenko, a man of the old guard, became general secretary. The Moscow case was quietly closed. Most defendants were released under amnesty. The name Sokolov vanished from records and newspapers as if it had never existed. But one image remained in memory, a scene no camera ever captured. An empty office, a stack of folders on the desk, and a wall clock frozen at 10 a.m., the moment of arrest.
From the case materials. Investigation terminated due to lack of criminal evidence in several episodes. Case materials sent to archive.
Soon, Yeliseyevsky's shelves filled up again. Red caviar and champagne returned to display as though nothing had happened. But from that day on, every Moscow director knew behind the brightest chandeliers, there's always a shadow.